This week, a precision strike on Iran. Our panel weighs in. Global leaders convene for the NATO summit and heap effusive praise on President Trump. And the shocking result for the Democrats' race for mayor in New York City. These stories and much more straight ahead this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Let's meet the gentlemen of the panel this week. Josh Mann is our managing editor, Michael Ryan, executive editor, and Adam Wittenberg, one of our staff reporters here at The Lion. Gentlemen, welcome into all three of you as we get going with a very, very busy news week. They seem to all be these days. President Trump has just come back from the Netherlands. As we record the show today, he has secured a massive deal on the NATO front. Josh, what do you know?
Yeah, I mean, in 24 hours, he was, left the U.S. and was back, and he had a commitment from all the NATO member countries to contribute 5% of their GDP to that alliance, and that's huge. I mean, that's been Trump's one of his biggest complaints, and, some weren't really sure how excited he was about the alliance, and for good reason. And so what a change. He comes back with their commitment, and he seems very committed to the alliance, it comes at a pretty important time in terms of world geopolitics and everything that's been happening between Iran and Israel. And so I think Trump's kind of doing a victory lap now. He went in, and of course he was called daddy by the general secretary, which is kind of the viral moment. Daddy sometimes needs to talk tough, and so that's one of the other takeaways from the NATO summit.
Yeah, we'll have that coming up, as a matter of fact, in our second segment. Adam, the fact is, this is a group of people, these NATO countries, they weren't really very interested in dealing with President Trump or taking his lead on much not terribly long ago. His first term, we were told that global leaders didn't respect and sort of laughed and dismissed President Trump in these global settings. Seems like the tone has changed.
Yeah, it definitely has. I think the world politics and the outbreak of wars and different things is changing it. But also, we're seeing a Trump who knows how to get results. And even what Josh was talking about, let's not forget that Trump was made famous in the 80s and early 90s, the art of a deal. He's a deal maker. He's a businessman. He gets stuff done. I never believed all that hype about him not being respected on the world stage, but we're seeing it now, that he's a force to be reckoned with. And I'll just got to quote this real fast. The NATO leader saying we need to make a stronger, a fairer, and a more lethal alliance. I mean, this is like American language. Make it great again. Lethality. Trump and Hegseth have talked about it. Europe's adopting that, and that is a win for Trump.
It's funny, Michael. Trump posted a texting exchange between him and the NATO Secretary General before the meeting. And I don't know if that's President Trump's way of showing the world, hey, just in case anybody does any double talking on the stage, I just want everybody to know behind the scenes everyone's thanking me for what I did with Iran.
Yeah, the term "who's your daddy" sounds really strange in a European accent. American leadership the last 4 years have been oddly absent on the world stage. And so there's this nuclear site raid by Trump against Iran that is heralded and cheered on by both Israelis and Iranians alike. And yet somehow the U.S. media dismisses it out of hand, and it leads to an impeachment effort of the U.S. president. I saw somewhere that 13% of Democrats support the Iranian regime, 52% can't decide. Meanwhile, 80% of Iranians oppose it. You've got a situation where the mullahs in Iran are almost more popular among American Democrats than Iranians.
Also this week, the big primary election of someone I think it's fair to say is pretty far to the left in Democrat circles. Adam, you've written about it at readline.com.
Well, actually, I didn't write about this, but The Lion, we have an article about it, and this guy, Mamdani, sort of came out of nowhere. He's only been a U.S. citizen, I think, for about 7 years, and he is a Democrat socialist. I mean, he's a socialist, and he's a Muslim, and not just those things, but the policies he wants are incredibly destructive. They don't work. They haven't worked in other cities, and yet the very liberal New York City has embraced him, and he has a very strong chance of becoming mayor unless there's some divine or high-level intervention intervention.
Sorry about that, Adam. Didn't mean to attribute that to you. But Josh, what do we know about this? I was asked rhetorically if for Republicans in next year's midterm elections, would they prefer to actually see someone like this elected in New York? If, in fact, you think these policies won't work, would Republicans like to point to this kind of radical left-wing progressive candidate as an example of what could come if you don't elect Republicans?
Well, they will if, in fact, he gets in, I'm sure. I think, it's a pick your poison kind of thing. Certainly, I thought that maybe, you see what Governor Gavin Newsom's doing in California. I thought maybe there was going to be this realization on the left that, hey, we need some more centrist candidates, and it seemed like some people were moving that direction. But now this will become a playbook for at least some in the party probably to say, hey, maybe we don't need to move to the center, we need to cater to the left, the far left. They had a pretty clever campaign, as I understand it, among young people there in New York City. I think I haven't looked at the exit polling, but a lot of that is going to need to be examined in terms of the politics of it. But this guy promised a Trump-proof the Big Apple. He played that up to double down on making it an LGBTQIA plus sanctuary city, as well as spending $65 million on gender transition services. So he's just like doubling down on the deep end of far left policy.
Yeah, Michael, free childcare, free transportation, rent control, grocery price control, Michael. And by the way, it wasn't like a huge, overwhelming turnout, but those that did on the Democrat side did turn out for him.
Yeah, in terms of turnouts, apparently the college indoctrinated broke heavily for Mamdani. So that was a lot of his support. Trump called him in a post a commie lunatic, and he's not alone fearing what's going on in New York. There's panic there. And there's panic in Florida, too, where people are saying, don't come down here. And there's debate about who can best beat this gentleman in November. Is it Adams? Is it the Republican candidate? Cuomo's already apparently getting out. I found a post by Tyler Winklevoss, most interesting. Now, you may remember him as one of the twins that sued Mark Zuckerberg over the founding of Facebook. And he said, quote, sometimes the only way to learn something is to learn it the hard way. Sometimes the only way to learn the value of what you have is to lose it. If that's the case, Marxism and socialism might just be what the doctor ordered. He's really torn about whether to try to save New York or to let it fail.
Meanwhile, another story at readlion.com getting our attention and Adam Wittenberg's attention is what's going on in Texas. They continue to revolutionize the education system down there. Universal school choice is now the law of the land, but they're zeroing in on how public schools are disciplining abusive teachers and others.
Yeah, something I like about Texas is they tend to take action on their problems. Now, it definitely helps. They have a Republican governor, a Republican House and Senate, so there is one party controlling the state, but they're not afraid to make bold moves and corrective moves. So what we have here is there have been thousands of sexual abuse, misconduct, inappropriate relationship cases reported in the state over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Now, Texas is a large state, second largest, so there are 5 million public school students. But nevertheless, thousands is way too many. One is way too many. And so the lawmakers passed 2 laws this year to close up reporting loopholes, background check loopholes, and something that was allowing schools to what they say pass the trash, where a teacher would have an incident at one school and they would resign and then quietly get a job somewhere else because there were so many public schools in Texas. So this is a good move. There still are way too many of these things happening, but at least the legislature and lawmakers in Texas are responding and taking action to try to crack down on these awful types of abuse happening in public schools.
Josh, do you have a sense, as we talk about public schools broadly, I know that's a huge focus of ours here at readlion.com, but everything from the strike on Iran to certainly the big, beautiful bill that we've talked about, there are a lot of domestic politics, immigration, that are now sort of front and center, and I wondered, at one point just a few months ago, it felt like public education, the Department of Education, Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education, that seemed very front and center. Has that taken a back seat, or do you think the momentum is still there? And I know you've covered what's in this big, beautiful bill by way of school choice as well. So is there still a drive, I guess is my question, in people reforming public school?
Yeah, I think the momentum's there. It might be kind of an undercurrent. It's below the surface right now. We're seeing the white caps of geopolitics. I think those are kind of the attention-grabbing headlines, but we're still seeing the school choice movement is strong. We're seeing, a lot of the legislatures have wrapped up in many states, and so we're not maybe talking as much about new bills or new laws. There's a lot of things playing out in the court system right now. We just published a story today that Adam wrote on constitutional. A court ruled that Ohio or Wisconsin's school choice program is unconstitutional. So we're still watching a lot of those things, but people on the ground, the grassroots movement, still very strong. Schools are expanding. Admissions, they're bursting at the seams in a lot of these places. So I think there's still a ton of momentum, and we'll probably see it pick back up here in a month or two. And I think the other thing was COVID. I think as that has sort of settled, we're talking a little bit less about it. I think it's become, more obvious to more people that there's a big problem with education.
Michael, you've written at readline.com a story about the Ten Commandments in public school, a recent ruling for people that are not caught up on it. Could you update us?
Yeah, speaking of the public schools, there's a laudable, I think, fight to reclaim morality in America through the public schools, but it may be doomed. And that's not to disparage the fine folks in public education. It's just the state of the law, apparently. Recently, the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the lower court judge that Louisiana's new state law requiring display of the Ten Commandments is, quote, plainly unconstitutional. So that's where we are. And I think what people need to take away from this is we have to look elsewhere to revive morality in America. We're talking about prayer, parenting, churches, Christian schools, and then public displays of faith, including vigils, marches, and showing up at government meetings.
And Adam, finally, the last story we're featuring here in this segment today is one you've written on the federal government, the Education Department, aforementioned, targeting California.
Yeah, this week, the government concluded its investigation into something that we all knew all along and was very clear from the start, that California has been violating the law, Title IX, by discriminating against women by allowing biological males, to compete in their sports. These men have been stealing championships and titles from women now for years. This has, of course, come to light since Trump re-entered the White House. And so basically where we're at is the government made a formal finding that California, you're in violation. They gave them a remediation plan. I guess they have about a week and a half to agree to it. And one of my favorite parts is it would call for sending all the women that lost titles an apology letter and a recognition of the title that they should have won. We'll have to see if the state accepts those provisions.
Panel, thank you. Coming up, a very, very busy week, including that strike on Iran. There was a lot of reaction. We'll get the panel's reaction coming up next on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome back to The Lion Week in Review. If you miss any of today's show or you'd like to go back and hear some more of this or read some of the stories that we've been talking about, always they're found at readline.com, and you can always catch us on YouTube. Past episodes as well. Gentlemen, the strike on Iran, that has been the dominant story of the week. There was a lot to talk about. Let's hit rewind and go to the beginning of the week as President Trump announced the successful strike.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success.
And they were also an overwhelmingly secretive successful strike. And Jennifer Griffin at Fox News was one who really made the point. They did not see this coming in the press.
This is an operation in the last 18 years since I've been at the Pentagon. I've never seen such operational security. There was nobody speaking about this, any of the preparations. There was a complete lockdown, almost a blackout of information for the last few days. I'm sitting here in the Pentagon right now. I can tell you the hallways are empty, and all of the information is coming right now out of the White House.
So I want to start with that, Josh, and the fact that there was such a dearth of information to the press, no leaks. That is atypical of what we've seen with the Trump administration in its first term. In my estimation, the press seemed almost agitated at the lack of information ahead of this strike.
It's so reassuring. I really hope it's true that, that's essential to military effectiveness, and it was effective. And the media is also, I think, was a little bit wowed. Honestly, as I watched it all unfold, I thought initially we weren't seeing a lot of criticism. I think even the biased media, legacy media, was sort of like, wow, it seems to have worked. And the whole thing was an amazing tightrope. I don't think it was a guarantee that everything would unfold the way it did in terms of the Iranian response, but everybody left feeling pretty good about what happened. It seems like the administration even let Iran fire a few missiles at a U.S. base just to, kind of swat the flies and let them declare a little victory. So it's really amazing, and it took a few days for the left, I think, to come up with something to start to criticize.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the left. We'll get into some of the pushback in a minute, but just sort of that initial strike, Michael, I want to stay focused on that for a minute. Your thoughts on it? I know on Saturday, I just happened to be at a baseball game, and it felt very similar, reminiscent to when Osama bin Laden was killed. There was a buzz throughout the stadium. I know people were glued to the kind of the operational coverage of that evening, and then the next morning, Pete Hegseth and the Joint Chiefs Chair hold a press conference. There was a lot of national interest in this.
Yeah, and Josh mentioned the almost a tacit agreement between Iran and the U.S. that, hey, we're going to lob some missiles at you. Just look forward about 8 o'clock or so. And what we're hearing now is that the leaders on our base in Qatari actually left the younger members of the forces there in charge and left and said, oh, by the way, shoot down these missiles when they come, which is a strange arrangement. We're coming up on the 4th of July, and I have to wonder, why is there so much anti-Americanism in America? I mean, you have somebody in the intel agencies leaking this report, unfounded apparently, report that the missiles that our raid didn't do the job, just to make it look bad. So I'm not sure I understand why somebody does that. And then the media said it didn't work, and then it was impeachment of the president. It's just, why are there so many people just rooting against the country?
Yeah, we'll take some of this in order, and you mentioned that. We will get to some of the pushback. I'll actually start with inside the tent, if you will, Adam. There were several prominent media figures who might call themselves Republicans, certainly Trump voters or Trump backers at one point, who accused President Trump of being led around by the nose by Israel or warmongers inside his own party, some of them said. I'll spare you the names, but Pete Hegseth was asked, I believe Monday after this strike, the critics that said this is another boots on the ground, open-ended quagmire of a war. Take a listen to what he said.
As the president has directed and made clear, this is most certainly not open-ended. It doesn't mean it limits our ability to respond. We will respond if necessary. The most powerful military in the world is postured and prepared to defend our people. But what the president gave us, as I said, was a focused, powerful, and clear mission on the destruction of Iranian nuclear capabilities.
So there were a few, as I say, conservative and or Trump voting critics who thought that this was going to turn into something much worse. Were they wrong?
I think so. I think Trump is a threatening figure in that he's kind of unbridled. This is the same president who had his spokesperson say, I have a 2-week window or deadline to make a decision. I'll make a decision within 2 weeks. And I think it was, 2 days later, he sent the bombing raid in the middle of the night. And it was executed with precision, and it was effective. This scares people on the left and the right. Well, you know who else it scares? These world leaders who knows that they know that Trump don't play and that he means business. He's actually so effective, I think it's unsettling. I do trust he has our country's best interests at heart. I think he's doing a great job. But I can see, because he's not under the thumb of the left-wing media or the right-wing media, he's being his own man.
Van Jones over at CNN, one of the rare moments that he says maybe his own side, his own party, the left, doesn't quite understand the threat Iran poses. Take a listen.
I think progressives underestimate how dangerous Iran is. Iran is not a normal country. Normal countries don't blind women because they showed some hair. They don't empower little gangs and proxies to surround a country and fire rockets and rape people. So Iran, the two things are clear. The what, they cannot have a bomb, and the why, because they say death to America, death to Israel, and death to all the Jews. One of those should offend you if you're progressives. At least one should offend you.
One should offend you. I agree with him. One should offend you, Josh. But yet, that's the thing that I've noticed, both from some of the critics, as I mentioned, on the right and the left. Iran never seems to be analyzed much. There's a lot of talk about Israel, but we never hear much about radical Islamist fundamentalism governing a nation with nukes.
Yeah, and Van Jones. I don't know what's gotten into Van Jones. He came on my radar when Glenn Beck was super popular and the Tea Party was raging, and Van Jones was this shady guy and affiliated with Obama. And now I constantly hear Van Jones saying really common sense things about the Democrats. But I think it's a great point. Let's just learn some facts about Iran, besides its population, with all due respect to, right-wing commentators, and figure out what is the threat and what kind of people are they, what kind of regime is this, what do they do, and who wants to defend that?
The NATO Secretary General, as we mentioned earlier in the show, by the time Trump made it to the Netherlands, he was daddy.
I mean, we may do papers on it, Marco. Maybe we're going to do papers. I don't even know if you need them. They're not going to be fighting each other. They've had it. They've had a big fight, like two kids in a schoolyard. They fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes. Then it's easy to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while, you have to use a certain word.
Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who is your friend, he called you daddy earlier. Do you regard your NATO allies as kind of children?
No, he likes me. I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay? No, he did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy.
Michael, the thing about it is, the way Donald Trump got so angry at Israel as they were prepared to drop some bombs, I guess as late as Sunday of this week, and President Trump had to get on the phone and tell them to stop. He got very angry, dropped his own F-bomb, talking about both of them. So, again, this notion that he was being led around by Israel is clearly not true in this exchange.
No, and in his first term, there was angst on the left that he would be the death of NATO because of his stance on getting them to, chip in a little bit for their own defense over in Western Europe. The fact is that he's been midwife to NATO's rebirth, and he is absolutely King Kong on the world stage, and he's yanking Western Europe toward a reasonable position of peace through strength. That's amazing what he's done.
Now we turn to what you guys had mentioned earlier, and they've been battling this strongly as we record this show in just the last 24 hours, including up to today as we record this show. Pete Hegseth pushing back on this idea that these strikes were not as effective as first reported. We go to President Trump at NATO addressing this with the CNN correspondent, Caitlin Collins.
Please, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, fake news, CNN? Oh, yeah. Here we go. Wait till you hear this question.
Thank you, sir.
You should really say how great our soldiers and our warriors are.
I think everyone appreciates our soldiers and our warriors. I do have two questions for you, Mr. President. You just cited Israeli intelligence on these attacks. Earlier, you said U.S. intelligence was inconclusive. Are you relying on Israeli intelligence for your assessment of the impact of the strikes?
No, this is also Iran made the statement. And it's also, if you read the document that was given, that Pete can talk about if you'd like, the document said it could be very severe damage, but they didn't take that. They said it could be limited or it could be very severe. They really didn't know, other than to say it could be limited or it could be very, very severe. and you didn't choose to put that.
And just a little more from Pete Hegseth, who came out swinging on this front as well.
Fake news, CNN, MSNBC, or the New York Times, there's been fawning coverage of a preliminary assessment. I've had a chance to read it. Every outlet has breathlessly reported on a preliminary assessment from DIA. I'm looking at it right now. Again, it was preliminary, a day and a half after the actual strike, when it admits itself in writing that it requires weeks to accumulate the necessary data to make such an assessment. It's preliminary. It points out that it's not been coordinated with the intelligence community at all. There's low confidence in this particular report. It says in the report there are gaps in the information. It says in the report multiple linchpin assumptions are what this assessment, a linchpin assumption, you know what that is? That means your entire premise is predicated on a linchpin. If you're wrong, everything else is wrong. And yet, still, this report acknowledges it's likely severe damage. Again, this is preliminary, but leaked because someone had an agenda to try to muddy the waters and make it look like this historic strike wasn't successful.
Bottom line, he was also asked about calling them our boys when there was a woman bomber pilot involved. This is what the press was kind of reducing the questions to today. So, panel, I'll let all of you take a bite at this apple, and that is, what is the press up to here in their coverage of this and giving such gravity to the idea that maybe these strikes weren't what they say they were? What do you say, Adam?
Yeah, I think it's an attempt by journalists to come up with some alternative narrative. As a journalist, you don't want to just copy the pack. You want to break news. And when I know that that's a pressure that journalists face. And then when you couple the desire to be different or to break news or find something exclusive with a extreme liberal bias, which has been proven, MSNBC, CNN, ABC, consistent to extreme liberal bias, you get the 1-2 punch and they can't resist. And of course, they're going to just put, well, it might not be real good or it didn't really work, even though it's very preliminary or the linchpin, like Hegseth was talking about. They're going to leave that part out.
Michael, your takeaway?
Well, it's Trump derangement syndrome writ large. What if this had been Kamala Harris that ordered this strike? I doubt that you'd see the reporting that you're seeing. And it shows also that the deep state isn't finished with leaking derogatory information, in their view, to the media to hurt a Republican president. What if this legacy media had been around and been passing immediate judgment on D-Day and emphasizing every setback or mistake by the Allies during World War II? We might have lost the war, but certainly it wouldn't have felt like a W.
Final thoughts from our panel when we get back on the Lion Week in Review. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. As we wrap up the show, we always like to ask our panel about their closing thoughts, maybe some things we missed or that they wanted to add on. Josh, we'll kick it off with you.
Well, we've got a couple of stories that might not sound really exciting at first, but they're super important, and that has to do with education and elections. Most people in most states, when they vote for their school board members, they're doing so in April. They're usually small elections, also school bonds, when schools ask for money. These are important times for the electorate to be engaged. In Wisconsin, there's a bill right now that would restrict the number of times schools can ask for money publicly. Wisconsin public schools are setting records right now in how often they go to the voters with these questions. And we have another story that talks about how school board members typically are not challenged in elections. And so usually the same old people get in every time, and they're not really accountable to voters. So take a look at those.
Yeah, I think New York proves what can happen when few people show up and vote. Adam?
Yeah, I want to call attention to a great story about a burgeoning homeschool movement in the city of Detroit, primarily among black families, but open to anyone. It's up on our website, readlion.com, and it's just very clear-headed, clear-minded about you can do this. A woman says, I wish I would have done it earlier. And if your kids are not being educated in their public school, you have a duty as a parent to pull them out and to find an alternative or make one through homeschooling.
Michael, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize again how historic this New York primary for mayor has been with the nomination of Mamdani, who is a clear socialist. He's also, a Muslim whose support for the Jewish community is questionable at best. I can't imagine anything else in American history that ranks with this in terms of national panic over a municipal election. It's just amazing what we have seen, the angst and the panic that's been going on since this primary. Even the Associated Press has noted that Democrats nationwide are concerned about this.
These stories and a whole lot more, constantly, every day, updated. You can find it all at readlion.com. It's always great stuff and a site you can trust for all your news. My name's Chris. We'll be back with you again next week, but let me wrap that up again. This wasn't good. I don't know where I went. I'll try it again. Panel, thanks a lot. That'll do it for this week's edition of the Lion Week in Review. Be sure to keep up to date on all the latest news, all these stories, and so much more breaking each and every day. We've got it covered for you at readlion.com. Until next week, thanks for checking out the show.